All right, let's get started. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are beginning our journey of the design way, and we are going to start off with part one. That's the first tradition. Today, many of you have read the chapter. If you have read the chapter, go ahead and type yes in the chat box. And there are few presentations, but each one of you is welcome to talk about what you got from the chapter. I encourage you to do that. That's the way in which we're going to get the maximum value out of this process. We're going to start with a presentation by Jing, talking about, giving an overview of the chapter, and then everything is up in the air from there. I have a fairly lengthy presentation on how we are planning to approach the book. This is the right time to do that right at the beginning. So we'll start with that. All right. I'll do that somewhere in the middle. So we'll intersperse everybody's comments on the chapter with the presentations of other people. All right, let's start with Jing. Jing, go ahead.
I can share the screen. Can you?
Oh, just a second. Hold on. Go ahead.
Okay. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, but if you could start the presentation, it will be a larger screen. Perfect.
Okay, so we will go to the first chapter, the first tradition. Actually, last time we have go over most of the things, so I reorganized the slide. So at the beginning, I mentioned the difference between discover versus design. It mentioned human designed the fire, not discovered the fire. Human designed the wheels. And it's mentioned the Western bias. They value observation more than imagination. And I think there's a key point is design is more purpose-driven with intention, versus this discovery is more by chance. And they also mentioned that Da Vinci, is he a scientist or artist? He actually a designer. A designer is purpose-driven, use integrated approach towards the world. So they are like the prime creator of our experience of reality besides nature of God. So that's actually how the archaeologists differentiate human from other species is through any artifact made by human is through design. So design is the third way, is combination of art and science. And then they mentioned about reconstruct Sophia, because Sophia used to be the integration of thought and action, which is design. But later on, since peace no, we mentioned last time, then there's a separation between humanity and science into two different cultures, which reflect in our current education. So we separate science from craft, science from humanity, from thinking from doing, theory from practice, white collar from blue collar. Design as third culture actually should be inclusive of both reason, which is science, and creativity, which is art. And then we trace back to the archetypal designer. So design, you have to imagine something does not exist, and you make it into a concrete form that is new and purpose addition to the reality. So design is addition to nature. So it both have potential, but also the fallible, which has unintended consequence we all experience nowadays with human invention, intervention of nature, like global warming, everybody knows. And so the design can create great service, but also could potentially create great harm, because we are not God. We cannot foresee the intended consequence I think the reason is that because we don't have this comprehensive overall understanding of the whole universe. I think that's the human limitation. And then they trace back to archetypal designer, Mr. Greek god. I have a hard time reading this name, Hippostos or something. So he actually, the lamb god, because he has so many imperfections, because to overcome the imperfection, he actually become very creative, and he has very handy, he create all these things. And through his creation, he overcome his imperfection and fulfilled his potential. And through this experience, he actually was able to help others to provide his service to others too. So design is as a way of overcome imperfection and fulfill our potential. And the next they're talking about why design. Why human want driven to design? Is that for survival, or is the continued improvement, development, human nature? Because we want to make difference in the world, participate in creation of nature. It's actually remind me why I want to be an architect at the beginning, because I want to leave something to the world after I die. I think a lot of architects may have that same intention. So we want to make the world our world. Basically, we try to create order in the world. It's design will, it's free will, it's we create something new and meaningful. It's new form, new reality. It's a source of free will that's mystery to human nature. It's also traced back to the hero's quest, which we encounter a lot in this 52 living idea discussion. So it's as a way we can control our environment, how we interact with the world. I think because of the world is not perfect and condition is not satisfied, so we lack this wholeness. We try to use design to overcome that. So meaning of enlightenment is bring order and give meaning to our life. That's the reason we design. And then they trace back to the history of design. Design is a combination of thinking and acting, but compared to science and art, there is lack of scholar history of design. And part of the reason because at the pre-Socratic time, Sophia means knowing hand. It's about thinking and action together. It's reflection and production. It means skill of craftsman. But after Plato and Aristotle, they separate the first principle and the cause, separate from practical wisdom and production action. Basically, they separate the thinking and doing. And the Sophia was further divided the knowledge of idea and the capacity of practical actions. Since Plato time, the people who think become top of the society. The people who doing things become lower the society, which still exists in today, like white collar and blue collar. So today we have white collar, blue collar, we have management and labor, thinker and doer. And so all these things is separated. And actually, design is the only way we can reintegrate this thinking and doing, because I actually thinking the reason people study technology, they have so much power, but usually they're the people who don't think much, the people I encounter. And there's people who actually study art or philosophy, they think a lot. They have all these ideas to change society, but they don't have tools. So that's my observation. I think that's the reason, because there is separation. People are powerless. They can't actually make much change in the world. And then they talking about the problem, solving wicked problem versus land problem. So nowadays we always encounter change through problems. So it's kind of like reactive mode we constantly experience. So we saw a problem, then we try to solve it. And we try to find the most effective and practical way to solve the problem. And that's become part of our education. But this reactive mode only works for tame problem. Versus the wicked problem, which is more important, significant issues cannot be solved in this simple way. And in the real world, we actually encounter more important is the wicked problem, not tame problem. This reminds me about book smart versus street smart. Why there people have all the education, all the knowledge, but in the real world, they're powerless because they can only thinking in this straight line way. More the book smart, they can solve the Tame problem, but not wicked problem. So this graphic actually I found it quite interesting, show how the wicked problem have so many intertwined, so many things tied together. And then compare these two problems. Problem solution, Tame problem is very straightforward. A wicked problem is very complicated. Most of our significant everyday encounter in the reality actually is wicked problem, not Tame problem. So wicked problem is more complex, ambiguity, and unique. And so when we encounter this, the book thinks the only way the design wisdom actually is the way to help us get out of our current dilemma, actually help us to be able to solve this more wicked problem, because it has richer concept than just focus on solving problems. Because it's design, you have to have intention, lead to desirable approach reality. So you design something, instead you try to react to the problem to solve it. Then they're talking about the wisdom, the abstract versus reality. Before the pre-Socratic wisdom, it's just about summarized data, it's knowledge. But then there's a kind of like they have hard time to maintain the link between abstract and reality, the rational wisdom and the unique design situation. And through the wisdom of design, actually, we need to reconstruct Sophia, because the separation of this reasoning and kind of like thinking, feeling. I think because of that separation, we don't have overall holistic understanding of reality. That's actually our dilemma nowadays. That's why we cannot solve the global warming or other problems, because only through rational thinking you can really solve the real reality, the real problem in the wicked problem. So the idea is reconstitute SOFA, integrate of reason, observation, reflection, imagination, action, and production. That's the design wisdom. That's we have the opportunity to solve real life problem. And then they compare the design wisdom is reintroduce analog into the world. Besides the digital and analytical thinking we are currently used in the Western world. And I think the digital and analytical is more about quantity versus analog is more about quality. It's talking about how we divide the time, into this zone, but it didn't nothing to do with how the quality of the time. So I think we conveniently divided academy into disciplines, which make get much deeper in each subject. But at the same time, the specialization also make it so separated. So the understanding of the world is so separated. There's a lack of holistic picture. It's so divided. Then there's a comparison of analog and digital, how the reality is like this, and the digital we make so fragment understanding, and the flower, then how digitalized the flower look like. And the design wisdom kind of shifting between this experience, analog experience of life, and the digital analysis of life, because you usually start design with reality, then you try to summarize, what is the problem, what do we want to create? You create this principle, then you come back to reality to find the solution, the unique problem solving. I think that's how design wisdom is kind of shifting between this analog and analytical thinking. Then we talk about the change. The design wisdom versus nature of change. We all encounter change every day. Sometimes through the scientific thinking, we think it's more rely on chance. Change is, so that's why we rely on the fate or luck. But it's through design point of view, we create change. We don't passively encounter change. We actually make changes. We make changes with our own intention and create it to our favor. So that's how design approach And they think because use design, we make the change. We could potentially solve the dilemma of today. Today, the problem we are facing, we have too much information. The technology developed so fast, we can hardly catch up. And then we have lack of understanding of this whole world. We don't know even what's going on. So it's very hard to make a right decision. So a lot of times we make change. It's kind of, so the idea way of problem solving is like we have this, we collect all the information, we analyze, we make decisions. But in reality is there's so much information we can hardly understand. So we cannot really make the right decision. It's most of the time it's just emotional reactive because the world is too complex to deal with comprehensively. This reminds me of how we have the comprehensive on Wednesday. So it's helped us to actually to more comprehensively understand the world because it's become so complicated. So we, the book believe, the design as alternative way. So we can solve this dilemma in our life. We can experience the life as a whole. So instead of like just functional quality, we serve much deeper significant need of human. And I believe that's, because design is never about just function. It's always have the art part. So it's both fulfill our rational needs and emotional needs at the same time. So they found artifact in the ancient, even a container, they always have some decoration on top. So that means humans really have these two needs at any time since very early. So the design thinking is it's kind of a circular process. So it's kind of integrated wisdom into a holistic fabric of life. So we so the idea is we have to create this design tradition to help us to to thrive in this world, to facing all the problems. Because we can practice design from a more broader perspective than traditional practice of material design. So this book, its intention is to create a new culture, a design culture. So the idea is to look at the human condition with purpose to create change, our first tradition. We tie back to this chapter title. So in any particular design, there's a dimension of art, technology, and science. And this inclusiveness way of experience the world can totally enrich our life and give us more tools to solve the world problem. And this, even though all designers strive toward the same goal to add change to the real world, this through the service-related creativity and innovation, both particular and universal way. We mentioned about design, both universal and particular. We solve a universal problem, use a particular method. So culture is never a nature occurrence. So changing a culture is hard. So the book mentioned it's hard. There's always tradition. People are afraid of change. There's all from order to chaos. So how we change this culture is kind of a tough task for us to do. So the idea, because there's always common sense and the people usually take for granted, we never question why, we just take it. So it's very important to create this new culture. We have to be open mind and with critical thinking. We have to question what we take for granted and find a new way to look at things. So this book is focused on characteristic and quality of cultural tradition that all designers practice to understand the general understanding of design, so we can all create a new design culture. I believe it will help us to bring us to a new way to solve all the problems and create a bright future for the whole world. Thank you.
Wonderful. Jing, this was great. You did a fantastic job of making the entire chapter present in the minds of everybody. So this is just great. And I love the graphics. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So next up, if you could stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, I'm trying to
next up is going to be Mike, Evanique, and Joe. Everybody is encouraged to talk about their takeaways from the chapter. It's a good way to start this discussion. So we'll start. Give me just a second here. I want to make sure everything is set up. Next up is going to be Mike Amori. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I took a lot away from thinking of design from necessity. So when you went back to the part about the knowing hand and going way back in time, just how important it is to have an appreciation for the design that allowed us to survive. So think of that as our base building blocks. Think of it as the real meat of what holds the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs together, or our need to have a home that will stand, our physiological needs, and how important they are to have an understanding of those. And it reminded me of a concept, I think I have it correct, called Chesterton's fence, which is, I think I've got this right. If not, I can explain it in a way that should be clear, that it's very important to understand why things were put before you. So if you're driving down the road and you come across a fence in the middle of the road, your first reaction should not be, let me get this damn fence out of the way. It should be, why was it put here in the first place? Which leads me again to think of just how important it is to understand, even in modern times, what it is that sustains us, how important it is to have an appreciation for architecture, for cement, for electricity, all these basic needs that come in, and not to go forward without having an understanding of what's behind us. For example, through the pandemic, a lot of us were rudely awakened to what happens when a supply chain shuts down. We don't think about trucking a good or, from farm to table, the steps that take place in between that. So one of the big takeaways I took from the chapter was how people started to give more appreciation to the thinkers and less to the doers. And it gave me, again, a deeper appreciation for what sustains us, and then going forward from there. And it also got me thinking about, when we were doing Comprehensivist Wednesdays, the difference between an incisive thinker and someone who's thinking more in a comprehensive way. And I think that design allows incisive people to live holistic lives, because if I'm incisive in one area, I am benefiting from people who do other things. And when you put it all together, I can be incisive yet live a holistic life at the same time. So I kind of had that vision going in. And there was one other quote, I think the author finished a sentence with, it finishes with, thus we are confronted with more varieties of what can be done than what we know we want done. And I think Gene alluded to that there's so much information and that there's so many possibilities that we just seem to forget so much about the basics. And we're up here where everything is swirling, where having an appreciation as to why somebody put that fence in the street in the first place. So that was my main takeaway, an appreciation for the absolute basic of design.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Next up is Evanik. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to share your takeaway at this time. Evanik.
Okay, so I'm going to start off a little weird, so just stick with me for like a minute. One of my pastimes to do is to watch HGTV, and I like the shows that restore homes, such as Fixer Upper and Hometown. And the reason why I like those shows is because you see the husband who's the contractor and the wife who's the designer. And when I read this chapter, that's what immediately popped into my head. Because what happens is, we talk about the separation, we talk about white collar versus blue collar. Well, in these shows, they work together. They actually are partners. And you can see the beauty that is created out of that. But what you also see is that the designer has to consult with the contractor to make sure that the design functions. And sometimes the contractor steps in and says, this is the way we should design it this way because it'll work better and it'll be more beautiful. And it comes out better, and it comes out better when they work together instead of the designer just handing off something to a contractor and hoping that it works. It just says, well, if we do this, wouldn't this even make it even better? And you can see, and when you see that, you see this idea Sophia coming back together. And so I think that's what I like too. And I think bringing in a little bit of Louis Sullivan of form follows function, I saw that in this chapter as well when you merge those two together, because sometimes, like you said, the thinker can be thinking all day, but they lack the skills to get it done. They lack the skills to take action because they're philosophically minded. But then the doer is the person that gets the job done, but sometimes it just doesn't have the beauty that it comes from the philosophical thinker. So when you bring those two together, they both enrich each other. And I think something Michael used that I thought was just really beautiful was when you bring these two together, it's like the holistic person or the holistic life. I think when you have design, when it's the way it's stated in the book, it just brings it all together. It just makes it more holistic. And so I like that too. And I think one of the things that that were talked about as well was the idea of design culture, and design culture, creating a culture that encourages design, but it's design in a holistic sense. And I was thinking of when that was said, and when I read it in a book, for some reason I was just thinking of inner city kids. And I guess because I was an inner city kid growing up, and inner city kids are inventive. They really are. Like, you learn how to survive in a totally different and creative way where you don't have the funds and you don't have the means, and you're trying to just make it, right? And you just come up with different foods, you come up with different ways to fix things. Something breaks, you can't hire somebody to fix it, so you come up with a way to fix it. And I was thinking, if you had design culture in those inner city neighborhoods, with those kids' inventiveness combined with people with experience, and you could bring the people who have experience in design in, like, think of what you could create. And I think you could solve a lot of the problems. Like Jamie was talking about, you could solve a lot of the problems that we have. I think you could come up with solutions for almost anything, because that's the way these kids' minds work. And you give these kids a future and an opportunity that they otherwise would not see for themselves. And I think that's how you bring designers in, is to give them the opportunity that they may not even see for themselves. But if you let them know that, hey, what you're doing is not just it is out of survival, but it's also something that you use that you can further yourself and your family. It's just infinite possibilities. So that's what I got out of this first chapter, is infinite possibilities when you combine the science and the philosophy and the humanities, and when you create a design culture where you bring designers in to help people that have the skills, but they just don't know it and they just need help. So that's what I got.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is going to be Joe, Charlie, Mark, and Brian. Joe.
Okay, so essentially from this chapter, that I really got the idea of as to why changes occur in the first place. And then you have these triggers, essentially, whether they be political, whether it be performance, whether it be economic or social, but you're reacting to a problem. And I think that the really important distinction here is the idea between tame and wicked problems. And tame problems are often just something that can be solved with the basic algorithmic just thought. And wicked problems really call for more holistic thinking, as we've been talking about, and Jane captured so beautifully. But one of the most important things that I think that really is to capture in this particular chapter is the costs that are associated by addressing a wicked problem in a tame way. And I say that because we have this way of just reacting, and you're addressing the problem, but you're not really looking at the root cause of the issue, the design as to why this problem is occurring in the first place. So to Mike's example, why is the fence there in the first place? You're really not understanding as to the real issue as to what the problem is causing or has been caused by. So the other important issue I found in here is how do you merge this analytical and digital? Because I think, and I had mentioned this before, I think that this is going to be something that I focus on as we go through this book, because I often see where I work that people defer to systems, analytical systems or software, as opposed to actually thinking about what they're doing in an analog way. So Mike actually talked a little bit about supply chains and how they've been messed up. And we all know this from current events. I can say that, we have our own supply chains where I work, issues. And primarily it's due to, we default to software, custom-made systems that kind of enforce the digital process down on the business process, the analog process of actually getting something from point A to point B. And in that transition, then all of a sudden things are actually less efficient and more expensive and more costly. So that's something, getting things out of our stock system, it's a nightmare. So that's just one example. And the reason why is because you defaulted to a digital or analytic solution versus actually thinking about the analog and the business process that actually it's supposed to be supporting. You disregarded that completely. So I think that that's really going to be something where I want to, explore with the design way a little bit further, and specifically how to develop design schemas. And that's really kind of when we're getting to the idea of building a culture of design. That's what, if you have a good design schema, these problems kind of take care of themselves. If, that's very difficult to achieve. I understand that, but it's something that I look towards exploring. I'm trying to think of some of the other things that I wasn't expecting to say anything this evening. So
that's fine, Joe.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I can come back with a bunch of other stuff.
Sure, sounds good.
That was all from memory.
We'll have plenty of opportunity.
All right,
thanks, Joe. Next up is Charlie, Mark, and Penny. Charlie.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something. I'm a very much of a holistic thinker, okay, and so I have to kind of grasp things or to get an understanding in a holistic sense. And for me, this difference between the real and the true is a little bit confusing, okay? Because I'll give you an example. When I was 4 years old, I had this experience with a magnet, and up till that point, I was convinced that the only way that a physical object could move was that it had to be pushed by another physical object. Okay, that it just couldn't get up and start walking around. Okay, if you saw a baseball starting to jump all by itself, you say, well, that's pretty damn weird. But when I saw magnets, where you could put the same poles, the North Pole against the North Pole, you could push something without touching it. Okay, and that freaked me out. I mean, I was in a daze for weeks over that, because it had completely crashed my idea about what reality was. I thought reality was just physical things interacting with other physical things, and all of a sudden, no, there's such a thing as invisible reality. And further on, I began to realize when I was around 7 that when you interact with a person, who are you interacting with? What is the reality, okay, of human interaction? You think you're talking with somebody, you think you're interacting with somebody, but that person could be putting on a show, Okay, they could be trying to manipulate you and so on. And so that just really makes the concept of reality very difficult. Okay, so that when, and this is especially true, he alluded to this in this chapter about the difficulty in social science to apply that type of thinking, the true. You know, how can you say what is true in social sciences? It's a quandary, and so this tension between. I really liked what he said towards the end of the chapter, where he said that you get this tension between the real, the true, and the ideal, and you have to adopt the mind of like an empty mind. That is talked about in Taoism and Buddhism, and then the design sort of emerges out of the interplay of those things, and the subconscious intuition and imagination come together, and it's, I guess, kind of almost like magic. But that's kind of how I'm kind of seeing it at this point in time. And but that's so I'm getting kind of, you know, this distinction between true and reality is something that I find, you know, not easy to understand, put it that way.
Wonderful. Thank you, Charlie. Next up is going to be Mark, followed by Penny. Mark.
Hi. So I guess there have been a lot of good things said already, so I don't want to rehash some of the great things that have already been said. But some of what affected me in this chapter is it made me think of what design looks like in practice, as opposed to what the digital versus analytical, let's say. I mean, I'm not an architect, I'm a software developer myself, but I appreciate architecture. And the thing that I've given a speech that's similar to this a bunch of times about City Hall in Philadelphia. It's still today the largest masonry structure standing. And can I share the screen for 1 sec? I'll just
sure. Give me just a second. Go right ahead.
Can people see that?
Yes.
So I mean that's Philadelphia City Hall, and that is, to me, the art of, it's both things coming together. Those that are the worker, the artists, and those that are the people that are doing the architecture, and those are the people that are, you know, doing the craftsmanship. It's hard to see from this picture because there's a lot to it, but there are literally hundreds and hundreds of these little statuettes all over, and there's William Penn at the top, who's like, I don't know how many, I think is 100 feet tall, or maybe not, it's huge. But it was an iterative process too. They had the plan, and they kind of built it in stages, because they kept on correcting for it, because they kept on wanting to add more stuff, basically. One of the things I find really interesting about it is if you actually walk through the halls, in this entrance over here in the front, that is the west entrance, I believe. I could be wrong on that. But there's 4 entrances, and they all had purposes behind them, and that's too detailed to get into right now. But one of the most interesting features, and I'm going to switch pictures here, is this one hall in the north wing, and it's hard to make it out. I'll try to zoom in a little bit more. But each one of these pillars had people with their backs holding up City Hall. This was made in, I believe it was 1870 is when this was made. And each one of the pillars had a different race of people. They had, one pillar was African people. There was one pillar that was European people. There was one pillar with Native American people, which is very apropos today. As well as one more pillar with Asian people, and they were all holding up City Hall. They all had their part. And this is, you know, in a time where that type of thinking wasn't really, you know, the way that I think everybody thought. Obviously, you know, it was shortly after the Civil War, so obviously half the country wasn't thinking that way. But the point is that even in a time like that, they wanted to show their ideals in this very building that represented the city. And it just strikes me when I look at the art and the craftsmanship and the feeling that you get. And the cornerstone it's just to the left of one of the leftmost pillar there. That's where they laid the groundwork of this city. Obviously not in William Penn's time, but when it moved in the 1870s. But the point is that this is what design can be. You know, what you see now is design for a more modern time is more functional. It's glass, it's, you know, it's silver, you know, windows. It's you know, putting a lot, it may have some small symbolism to it, but this is artistry everywhere you look, but it still represented the future, the past, and the present. And to me, I think that this is what design can be. And I'm impressed with it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Next up is Penny. Penny, go ahead. Penny, you need to unmute. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to share a small thought that I had in the book, and that was kind of, you know, when they were talking about design wisdom shifting from problem solving to focusing on intentional actions that lead to states of reality which are desirable and appropriate. And so just thinking about that kind of in my own life, one small example I gave that I think it is design wisdom is I used to be a lender. And so I worked with a lot of manufacturing companies and I lent money to the company. But they told me, a couple of them said, you know, we put suggestion boxes all over the facility. And anybody who had an idea about what they thought could improve something, they could write it out and put it in the suggestion box. And they said, actually, the best suggestions were coming from the factory floor, because these were the people who were doing the things. And then they were thinking, you know, well, we could do it this way, it would be better. They could do it that way, it would be better. So they were actually kind of amazed that these were the people, and those were the, you know, so I think that's kind of a combination of the working and the thinking. These were the people who are actually doing it. So they were able to, you know, think of other things which actually improve things. So just a small example.
Thank you. Thank you. Jing, you had something to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, so luckily my husband sent my kids to school. So I just heard Joe mention, I want to chime in, you know, I think this problem of reactive not solve the problem from the root cause is showing both in any other aspect of life and also especially in medicine as well. I shared before, you know, how Western medicine is so reactive, like my kids have this allergy and then they reflect on skin, then they just try to repair the symptom. I think this holistic thinking, you know, is so important for us to solve any problem. We have to react for the emergency, but in order to solve the problem, in the end, we have to step back and find the root cause to solve the real problem, the wicked problem.
Thank you. Thank you, Jing. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about how I'm planning to approach the book. And I'm going to use one of my favorite thinkers, Marshall Mcluhan, in order to do that. So this is Marshall Mcluhan's Tetrads applied to our Design Way meetups. The basic idea of Tetrad is that everything is a tool. Everything has several impacts on our lives. Simplest one, the way I think of it is that it is redo. It is retrieve, enhance, displace, and overextend. A tool, a new artifact, retrieves something from the past. The core idea of what something can be is retrieved from the past. Then you enhance something. You make it more powerful, more able to do something. When you succeed in doing that, you displace what was already there. And most often, the tools are used to excess. So you overextend, causing all kinds of unanticipated results and all kinds of side effects. And all these four things are happening at the same time. various tools interact with one another. So it's a very profound idea. Let me go ahead and talk about where I see design way here. Our world, Western world, is dominated by analytical and digitized thinking. It started with starting of print and philosophies like Descartes that emphasized, I think, therefore I am. It emphasized the digital over the analog. What it was retrieving, analytical, digitized kind of thinking was, I would say, logic of Aristotle, but extending it massively, using all kinds of scientific methods, all kinds of ways of perfecting this tool, also extending the scope of its implementation through printing. What it was obsoleting or displacing is this integrated way of thinking that was there throughout. And it has overextended where our life is dominated by digitized thinking. Everything is separate. Everything is disintegrated. Everything is distinct. I think design way, so what happens is that the next tool, you can understand something in context as a reaction to the overextension of something that happened in the past. So I see the design way as a response to this condition that we are living in. And what it is retrieving is the first tradition. Now, I've deliberately not written down what I'm saying about for each of these tools, what is the retrieve, what is the extend, what is the displace and overextend. I'm just speaking it out. And at the end, I'm going to invite you to talk about your own takes on what these various things are retrieving, what is it extending, enhancing, what is it that is displacing, and what is it that is overextending. So the design way retrieves the first tradition, the original way of integrated thinking of design. What it extends, it goes much beyond the first tradition because it integrates all of the analytical way of thinking and builds it into a tool to develop our skills of design. What it displaces is the disintegrated way or just using off-the-shelf things without thinking. And what is the possible overextension is that we always have to look out for thinking that we have basically arrived in the sense that we know everything about design and be close to other ways of design. So that's a very quick take on this. Even the book itself, I see the 4 parts in this term. So now before in the previous slide, in this slide, we were looking at design way from outside of its impacts. Now we are looking at design way from inside. So what it does is that in chapters or parts 1 and 5, it actually retrieves the idea of man as a designer. The part 3 is focused on building the skills of design, the how. So the first one is who are we? The second one is how do we design? The part 2, it is displacing the old ideas and replacing them with new ideas. Things like ultimate, particular, or service, or wholeness, or systemics. These are all ways of getting away from disintegrated way of thinking and replacing those ideas with these integrated ideas. Overextension is something that we have to always watch out for. This is built into built into thinking. So what we would do is that we would have to look and see whether we have fully retrieved what the human being is. Is there something that is missing? We would have to be always aware of that. Let's go to the next one. What we are doing here 52 living ideas is also two. It is also medium. The idea here is living ideas. What it holds is that in order to really retrieve an idea of any kind, like Designway is an idea, it is not enough to use the digital version of it. It's not enough to just have a book, because book by itself is digital. What you need to do is you need to enhance it by this entire envelope of dialogue, conversations from multiple points of view, discussing every part of the idea. That is the enhancement that we are doing. We are displacing the digital kind of almost deductive way of thinking and applying ideas to bring back the kind of oral tradition or the scribal tradition, when in Aristotle's school, peripatetic school, people read and talked at the same time. The same thing happened in monasteries. That's what we are bringing back together. So the book is surrounded by conversation, which goes back into writing. Again, overextend, I'm going to leave empty of saying, okay, what can go wrong with this? But we have to be always aware of that this method that we are doing, what are the negatives of it? So what I'm planning to do is that, the authors invite us to approach the book in any order that we choose. There is a circular diagram. So I encourage you to read the book in any which way you want. You can read it sequentially. You can dive into any topic that interests you. What I want to do in the discussions is that I want to hit these 4 different areas in sequence. Instead of moving through the book, going through first the first part and the second part and third part and fourth part and fifth part, I want us to have these multiple perspectives on a continual basis. So this is the order. So it will be moving in a spiral through the book. So today we're discussing the first tradition. The next one will be apart from the enhance quarter of developing the skills of design. So we'll be talking about composing and connecting. And then we will go to one of the key concepts that is being replaced by ultimate particular. This is a way of getting away from just focusing on material things as if they were given and just are there, and also from ideas which are disconnected, by bringing together the ideal and the real into one. That idea we'll focus on. And then in terms of the next one, we're going to look at the splendor of design in terms of when it comes to the overextend quadrant. Now, what I want to do next is, and we will do another pass like that going forward. I'll put all of this sequence up, and I'm open to discussing this further. All right, now this one is a very surprising diagram. This comes from Marshall Mcluhan. His great observation is that actually his tool that he has developed of tetrads comes from Aristotle's causes. And his point is that the most important cause is the formal cause. In his own wit, he calls it farmer cows. He says there is the farmer cows and the other cows. So the other causes are relatively secondary. The way I understand formal cause is it's getting to the heart of the nature of something. So in this case, it's the nature of human beings. What is the nature of human beings? That is the core that we are asking. So in Marshall Mcluhan's take, the retrieve is the formal cause. Enhance is the efficient cause. Displace is the material cause, material that is being displaced by the new efficient cause. And overextend is a final cause, where you are being aware of the value implications of what you have done. So that's how it maps into that. To give you an example, and on this, Joe, if you could put, we did a whole presentation of the connection between Marshall McLuhan's Tetrads and the 4 causes. This was a presentation by Mark Stallman that happened on Sunday, yesterday. So Joe, if you could put a link to that. Next, on Saturday, we discussed a very similar concept, and that came from Louis Sullivan. Now, Louis Sullivan's terminology is slightly different. His way of design, and on Saturday, we did a full meetup on that, on Louis Sullivan's philosophy of design. And Joe, if you could put a link to that in the chat also. Louis Sullivan's core insight is that form follows function. And in this chapter that we studied called Face to Face in his autobiography of an idea, he asks a really, really deep question. Why is it that there is so much bad design around? And he has a very interesting answer to it. He says, in order to understand, you have to understand the nature of human beings as a free spirit. And he talks about man's powers. He talks about what human beings are. That is the function. The forms that we create is an expression of that function. And when that order holds, forms follow functions, things go well. He says the problem lies in the inverted self. What is an inverted self? Inverted self is when forms come first. When you say goods are here, these are the traditions that are already there. I have to accept them. Moment you accept the primacy of forms that are already there, your ability to function is diminished or is completely killed over time. So that is his take on form follows function. So these are the various ways of looking at this. So that's what we are going to do. We are going to go through this book. So the next chapter is going to be chapter 9. I want to keep stepping back. And again, I'm going to encourage you to read the book in any order you choose. I recommend that you read the chapter that we are discussing before you come, because then you will get most out of the discussion. I've personally gone ahead and read the book very fast, and now I'm going through chapter by chapter in great amount of depth, reading the chapter multiple times, making lots of notes. That's my style of doing it, but employ your own style. At the same time, if you could read the chapter that we are discussing, I think you'll get most from it. I'm deliberately choosing different kinds of chapters because I think they will speak differently to different people, and more people will get on board of actually becoming a designer. So that's the plan. All right. So that was my take. Now, next up is going to be Maritza, followed by Ambika. Maritza.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So sorry for my tardiness here, Shrikant.
No problem.
Apologize. So the first tradition, I look at this one as an idea of telling us about like basically what humanness is when we're looking at design culture. And something else from this chapter that I really liked was that the reminder that when we're saying design here, we should be ever cognizant that we're saying design culture. That we don't always use the word culture, but we're not referencing design by itself. We're talking about this building of an entire culture. I love that there's a buildup throughout the chapter that is pointing out to us the fact that the first tradition is design wisdom. And again, I'm apologizing for missing those who have spoken before and their details. I'll go back and watch the video. So there are so many different aspects here that I thought were really important, but the one that spoke to me most was the idea of change. So the authors here tell us that change is a vital part of our everyday experience of life. And this is something that just like in the video, when we watched the video and Harold Nelson told us that design is something that is just not in the human consciousness of the day-to-day, I feel like change is also something that, because it's everywhere, we tend to denigrate it and not give it the importance that it does require. And unfortunately, that denigration leads to an assumption that it's gonna just tag along with you, right? Even if you pay it no mind. And I think that we're doing a disservice to the concept of change, because it is always there. But if we are not aware of the fact that change is a constant presence, we fall into the trap of getting stuck in one perspective. And we've spoken before here as a group of the idea of multiple perspectives. And I personally love to remind people of the danger of the one story, right? And I think that that's kind of something that we're seeing here in, you know, the idea that this concept of design wisdom, it's not like wisdom. You know, we none of us wake up with wisdom. We are all born, and we all have to work our way towards this grouping of life experiences and knowledge that over time, if we're fortunate, it will evolve into this concept of wisdom. And so if we're calling the first tradition design wisdom, then it would presuppose to me that we're going to view our path towards design culture as being this gathering of ideas, experiences, concepts that hopefully will culminate into this wisdom that can be used to structure a culture. At least that's kind of the way I'm viewing it. I really just, I love that culture is specified here so strongly. I have to say, and I think I said this last week, and I'll say it again here, it is a shock for me to read the one sentence that says that culture is never a natural occurrence. There's a very large part of me that really wants to reject that. Like, I really, really want to yell at the book and say, you're wrong. That can't possibly be true. But then, you know, logical side of my brain takes over and says, calm down, emotions. And I see the validity of this statement. And even though I'm not going to lie to you guys, I've read this a few times now. Every time I read that line, I get all flushed and hot, and I really physically want to reject that comment. And I think that that's actually the point of what is being said in this chapter. The idea that, you know, we're focusing on. So what I think we're being told is that this concept of intentionality is so pervasive. Not pervasive, it's vital, because we take things for granted. Like, I believe culture, or not believe, well, I'm working on not believing that anymore, because I do logically see the facts that support the statement that culture is not a natural occurrence. But I would like to believe that culture is something that's always just going to happen. But if I'm looking at it rationally, if I'm looking at it logically, what we're hearing here is a reminder that the way forward must be an intentional one. So if I sit back and assume that culture is just something that's going to happen, I am going to wake up one day and find myself in a space where I'm like, I am living in a cultureless society. How the hell did I get here? And I'll be totally confused, but it's because I was sitting there just assuming that culture was coming along for the ride when culture requires a designer. And that's, I don't know if maybe mind blowing is a little bit of a strong thing to say, but that's a really powerful thought process to me. I had never before thought that. Like, I come from a world, it's like a chaperone society. We're very community based, right? And so in my mind, I just thought culture was always there. So that to take a step back and to really contemplate this idea that something that I view as so big and so necessary as culture cannot come about without a designer. That's heavy. And the designer requires the use of this wisdom, this design wisdom. And that's how we get to this idea that it's the first tradition, because that's when you're on a forward path, you start with the first one, right? And so there are many more points of this chapter, but honestly, that's the paragraph that tripped me up. And it's the paragraph that I reread the chapter, hoping that that paragraph was read wrong and it didn't exist there. And after the second time reading it, I was like, it exists there. I got to make my pieces with it. And that's, I think I have made my peace with it. I think that basically it's a matter of being fluid and shifting one's perspective. And really it's that realization that a culture requires a designer. It has to be brought into existence. It's not just gonna naturally be there. And in its own way, that makes sense. And I hope this is not super off topic to what you guys have been chatting here. If it is, I apologize. But that is, not having heard what others are saying, I just wanted to share that is the piece that I really struggled with in this chapter. And so I'm hoping that as I read more and get more into it, I can make even more peace with that idea. But I think that I get it. And I'm going to stop there. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Maritza. I think that was spectacular, and it produced more reaction and more exclamation marks than ever today. So, but what we are going to do, folks, is we are at about 10:12. So we are going to go directly into the breakout rooms, and so that you can talk about all of these things. And then when you come back, please raise the best question that you have, and we will do a lightning round of the questions. In the breakout rooms, it's going to be Joe, Maritza, Mike, and Evanique are going to be the facilitators. The rules in the breakout rooms are always the same. Keep on topic, be brief, and feel free to speak your mind and do so courteously. All right, starting the breakout rooms now. They will last for 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, you will be back here with the best question that you can put on the table. Starting the breakout rooms now. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. All right, so now it's time for the lightning round. What are the questions? So just the questions right now. Let's put all the questions on the table. Then we'll organize them. We will put them down one by one, from more general to more specific. And then we will have quick answers to all the questions. Let's start with Zheng, followed by Joe.
Yeah, my question is actually we discussed a little bit. So the question is why the thinking and doing was separated at the time. What the
Wonderful.
reason lead to that separation?
Wonderful. Why was thinking and doing separated? Excellent question. Joe.
It's almost the exact same question. So we were in the same breakout room. But the only thing is I was going to add is what are the forms that separate thinking from doing? So that's same question.
Sounds good. Next up is Mark, JJ, and Hugo. Mark. Mark, you need to unmute.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
So I have two that as a group, we kind of were talking about a lot of subjects, but they all seem to revolve around, how once we get design for a larger community, and it's a larger community kind of a thing that we're talking about. You can talk about design at many levels, but we're talking about design for community. How do we perpetuate it? And who decides what we design? How do we decide it, in our group, what group gets to say?
Okay, excellent. How do you perpetuate designs at a group level? Very good. Next up is going to be JJ, followed by Hugo, Charlie, and Ambika. JJ.
Hi, my question is there a
little bit louder, JJ.
Oh, is there an a priori design?
Okay. Is there an a priori design? Can you specify what you mean by a priori?
Inherent.
Okay. Is there a inherent design? Very good. Thank you. Next up is going to be Hugo.
Yeah, thank you, Shrikant. My question is about intentional change as opposed to accidental and necessary change. So intentional change, it's, from what I understood, it's the aim of the design way. So my question is, are there any metrics that we can use to be sure that we are using intentional change, that we are using the proper approach rather than problem like reaction-based approach?
Got it. I'll put it as I'll put it as how do you measure intentional change as opposed to the other kinds of change? Excellent. Next up is going to be Charlie, Ambika, Kevin, and Laura. Charlie.
Okay, outside of games like chess and checkers and chess and Go and so forth, are closed system designs. In other words, systems that do not allow for influence on the system from the outside of the system. In other words, the only influence on the system is constrained within the system. Okay, are those types of systems inherently, for the most part, bad designs?
Okay, are closed systems bad designs? Excellent. Next up is going to be Joe. Can I ask you for a favor? Can you type up these questions as I'm stating them, and then you can email them to me and I'll put it on the YouTube video. These questions are just priceless. I'm going to repeat all of them for you. Okay.
All right. Yes.
But,
yes.
I think these are fantastic. I'll put it up both on the Meetup page and the YouTube page. Thank you, folks. And questions are far more important than answers. So I'm just focused on getting all the questions, and then we'll of course answer them. Next up is going to be Ambika, Kevin, and Laura. Ambika.
So I was very intrigued by certain aspects of the chapter, and what showed up for me was the problem solution model that has become so much a part of everything we do, which seemed to be controlled by money, power, that structure. And for us to learn to be the new human that we are desiring and designing, how can we change that very ingrained structure that is actually quite destructive?
Wonderful. How do we become human when the society around us is operating on the problem solution model? Let's put it that way for
So
now.
separate and,
Next up is going, thank you, Ambika. Next up is going to be Kevin, Laura, and Maritza. Kevin.
Yes, thank you. My question, you kind of reframe the question. My question is, how do you consider our own cultural habit? For example, I'm going to make less, spend more. I keep use credit card year by year. Is from person, community, or country. So, and they is not sustainable. So how do you, should I change my own behavior or culture? Thank you.
Wonderful. So how do you evaluate the design of your own life and that of your community? Thank you, Kevin. Next up is going to be Laura, Maritza, and Ada. Laura.
Okay, my question was sort of, how do we grow a design culture? We're talking, everything we talk about is like, adult, mature, learned people. But when we start with children, how do we create a design culture in them?
Wonderful.
Okay, does that make sense?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm going to put it in terms that how do you teach a design culture to children? What kind of education system is needed to teach design culture to children? Thank you. Next up is going to be Maritza, followed by Ada. Maritza.
This came up in my discussion group, Shikant. The question was, which came first, culture or design? Which should come first?
Okay, which should come first? That looks like a trick question to me, but okay.
I agree.
Very good. Which comes first, culture or design? Okay, thank you. Next up is going to be Ada, followed by Mike. Ada.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
My question is, what is the role of emotions in the design, creating design?
Okay, what is the role of emotions in design? Oh, these are so amazing questions. Okay, Mike, question only, please. Mike, you need to unmute.
I need to set the predicate for that, so I'll leave it till
3 sentences.
3 sentences. Okay, form follows function. Is the challenge to balance the resources available to the requirements in the face of the fact that the resources are uncertain. And resources include time. Resources include the state of the art and a whole list of other things. And by way of saying that form follows function says it's requirements driven, and that's a constrained optimization problem. And by evidence thereof, in the acknowledgements, the author quoted, well, one more sentence. The author credited Russell Ackoff and Robert Sandusky, who's in the audience, and the Carnegie Mellon, the system design methodology. So resource is form and function is requirements, and it should be requirements driven, while both of them are uncertain and under risk. So it's a constrained mathematical optimization problem, which Russell Ackoff came up with a solution for. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to put it as okay. This is going to be the toughest one to put together. Let me see. Okay, given that design is always done in the context of uncertain and limited resources. How?
Requirements driven is the key.
Okay.
Design should, and that's form follows function, or maybe function follows form, but the two are intimately related.
Okay. All right. So how about this? Let me make it simple. Given the constraints, does function follow form, or does form follow function? And in what case it is? Let's put it that way. All right. Let's go ahead and now go to answers. Okay. You know what? I just love these whole series of questions. Almost every one of them is excellent. So I'm just going to start from the beginning, and we will go ahead. Please try to keep your questions, your answers short, so we can get through as many of these questions as possible. As we are doing this, I will keep reorganizing it, but let's start with why did thinking and doing get separated? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you have answer to the question. Why did thinking and doing get separated? Zheng.
Yeah, my understanding is for efficiency. You know, it's because we can get much deeper if one person just focus on one thing. That's why we get into this industrial revolution and also the specialization. So we have developed in different branches so deeper. At the same time, at the price of, you know, oral understanding.
Got it. So what you're saying is it's due to specialization, the effectiveness of specialization. Next up is going to be Joe, Maritza, Mark, and Charlie. Joe, why?
Yeah, I mean, really, I think specialization is a key component to that. You can add in things like the Industrial Revolution that have separated the individual from and made them a cog in a process versus actually making them part of the process. I think Zhang also hit on the idea of efficiency versus effectiveness, where the efficiency is the least amount of money, or that you're looking to essentially to answer a problem, whereas effectiveness is you're looking at the idea of success and how you define success within that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
We definitely have to hear Mike's optimization answer.
No. We would be here all night. We won't be able to take to any other answers or any other questions. Next up is going to be Maritza, Mark, Charlie, Mike Amori, Laurie, and Kevin. Maritza.
I think it's as we move towards being proactive versus reactive, it's a side effect.
Thank you. Excellent point. Next up is Mark.
I guess I was going to say the same thing about the specialization, and just to bring the point to a finer point, talk about pencil. No place can produce a pencil, all the things that you need for a pencil, from all the ingredients. Each one of them is specialized, whether it be the wood, lead, or graphite, whatever, all the parts of an eraser. These all come from different places, and they're efficient that way. They're specialized in doing one thing. There was a time where that all came from one place.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Next up is Charlie, followed by Mike. Charlie.
Well, my answer is very short. Platonic ideals, basically. Before Plato, people were willing to include the whole world, like Heraclitus, and Plato comes along and says, "Oh no, the world's just too messy. We just can't deal with all this big crappy mess. So the only thing that's really, really real are the Platonic ideals," and that just shut the conversation down.
Excellent point, Charlie. Great. Next up is Mike, followed by Laurie. Mike.
I think they take each other for granted. I think the great thinkers are in a tower that they know is not going to collapse. And the people who build that tower know that the great thinkers are thinking of the next project for them to work. So they're separated, but yet they coexist because of each other.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Next up is Laurie, followed by Kevin. Laurie.
Okay, so I think maybe it has something to do with money and power. Somehow money started getting concentrated at the top, and then even the thinkers could become kind of cogs in this whole system, this whole money system. And you kind of see it now. I feel like now a lot of times, any company is focused on making money rather than making power or cars or whatever. It's all about money. So anyway.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurie. Thanks. Next up is Kevin, followed by Penny. Kevin.
Thank you, Frank. First, I would say that this book says the design of the designer. Also, you need to think the designing process. That's, for example, industrialization. I would change our thought a lot. We think like we don't need a thinker. We need a worker. So that's why let's say you move this brick, move another one. It's kind of like a chicken and egg, Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Penny.
So this time it's Brian with a comment.
You look different, Penny. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I agree, I definitely agree with what others have said, and many people in our group and now in this bigger group have touched on the issue of power and money and the hierarchies that exist. But I'd also point out that when we're thinking about this, we tend to think about individual projects, and that there's a separation of knowing and doing an individual project. But if you think about projects over time, a series of projects over time, I don't think you can talk about separation of knowing and doing in the same way, because the architect has done a drawing, that is a doing, and they have learned from doing many drawings how to do the next one. And the same is true of many, many different professions.
Thank you. Next question is going to be a very short question, and short answers, please. What comes first, culture or design? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to answer that. Kevin.
Yeah, I would say this use a chicken egg. That's easier. You cannot come either this first. It has to continue improvement process. Thank you.
Avanique.
I think culture comes first because in a way you can't really have a design without people cooperating together. So culture comes first.
Mark.
So I'll say culture, because I don't think that you need to have humans to have culture. And I also would pick a bone with the fact that there was fire before design as well. That was the beginning of the chapter. I meant to get to that and I didn't cover it, but I don't
Ambika.
agree.
No, let's not go off the topic. Ambika.
Yeah. Culture is design.
Excellent. Next up is Jean, Maritza, Charlie, and Laura. Jean.
Yeah, I think culture first, then you design, you create new culture afterwards.
Maritza.
The fire does it all.
So the funny thing.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Maritza. You have to unmute again.
Oh, oops. Sorry.
My fault. Go ahead.
Oh, I want to say culture, but I suspect that the point of reading this book is that design actually comes first.
Thank you. Next up is Charlie, Laura, and Mike. What comes first, Charlie?
Okay, I kind of agree with Kevin in the sense that it's the chicken and egg thing, but basically the way I see it is that culture only makes sense within social animals. Okay, and so if you go back in terms of evolution in a sense itself was the designer, through the evolutionary process, and so that so it's
okay.
Yeah, I'm basically I'm agreeing with Kevin, but I'm kind of adding in this whole evolution thing that culture evolved, okay, and came out of that process.
Next up is Laura. Laura, what comes first?
I was going to go with culture, but now I'm not so sure.
Next up is Mike. Mike, two sentences. Mike, 2 sentences, please.
A culture represents the state of the art and the state of the practice. Most cases, you try and stay within it, but some requirements dictate that you have to extend the state of the art, extend the state of the practice. Those things have risk. And so uncertainty, risk, and the chicken and the egg are all related to this.
JJ.
I say design. You can't have culture without design first.
Okay, very good. I agree with Ambika. I think culture is design. Next up is going to be the question about intentional change. How do you distinguish intentional change from chance or necessity? How do you measure the extent of intentional change you're doing as opposed to being reactive? How do you distinguish between proactive intentional action versus reactive action? Zheng followed by Joe.
Yeah, I think the difference is design. If you have the design or not, that's the difference.
Thank you. Joe.
Design and the ideal, I would say, is the distinction between those two.
Thank you. Ambika.
Depends on how you hold the fire.
Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead and type exclamation mark.
How do you distinguish intentional change from accidental and necessity?
Yes, that's the question. You are on camera. Go ahead. Brian, what's your answer? Penny has asked you the question. No? Okay, now you're on mute. Okay, anyway, next up is Charlie.
Yeah, I think it's a false dichotomization. I think it's a continuum. There's shades of gray, and so that being reactive and being proactive is not always easy to draw the line between those two. So it's
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Maritza.
It's like with dancing, when you stop, did you kick your foot back? Are you in position open? If you are, it was intentional. If not, it happened to you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Next up is going to be, given that we live in a world which is digitized, which is focused on problem and solutions, which is specialized, disintegrated, how do you remain human and design that is human in this world? How do you do that? Brian or Penny?
Oh, sorry, I chimed in on the last one.
Go ahead, go ahead.
I'm gonna pass.
Okay. Jen.
I think I feel very lucky. I'm an architect, so I actually was able to do it with my work. But for people who don't do it with work, but besides my work, actually I cook. I found cooking is much quicker. So you design something, then you make it. You get architecture take way too long in America. We said we built a city in China already. We hardly have a house built here. And I think for people who don't really have that chance, and they should do something on the side to balance it out, do some creative things, to balance it out.
Wonderful. Ambika.
Always have a pot of tea ready to share with anyone.
Thank you. Next up is Joe.
Imagine the world as analog. That's if you imagine the world as analog, then you can actually reimagine it, the digital aspect of it.
Wonderful. Charlie.
quick answer. That's a wicked problem, so it's going to be a long time answering that one.
Thank you. Thank you. Maritza.
Change your perspective.
Wonderful. Next question. How do you evaluate a design? Once you have designed something, what standards do you use to say that the design is good design? Any thoughts? I think we'll be able to answer the question better. All these questions, hopefully we'll be able to answer better and better as we go along, but we should still put our answers out there, stick our neck out, make mistakes, and hear ourselves making mistakes. That's so let's see what our answers are. Jeng, Evanique, Ambika, and Laura. Jeng.
I think the good design have to speak to our right brain and our left brain at the same time. Have to be functional, practical. At the same time, it can touch our emotion.
Wonderful. Evanique.
I think how you tell that, you know, a design is a good design is, does it work the way it's intention to or better? So did it make your existence better or worse?
Thank you. Next up is Ambika, Laura, Laurie, and Mike.
So
Ambika.
how it appeals to all your senses and makes you go, ah, and allows you to breathe in that space. If you can't breathe, it's not good design.
Thank you. Laura.
Oh, I almost can't say this, but it just goes back to my research days. You want to have a rubric that you'll evaluate it against. So figure out all the elements that you think are important that you should want to meet, and then some, and evaluate your design against it.
Thank you. Next up is Laurie.
I just think no design is ever perfect. So it's really important to evaluate it and just be willing to improve.
Thank you. Next up is Mike. Mike, 3 sentences, please.
1 sentence. How well you met the requirements, and those requirements include cost, time, completion, and everything else mentioned.
Thank you.
Before.
Thank you. Next up is Joel, followed by Brian and Penny. Joel.
So I'll second Mike's answer with the idea of requirements, but I'll just replace the words with functions and purpose.
Wonderful.
So
Go
if
ahead.
if it serves the function, then and its purpose, then you can determine if it's a good design.
Wonderful. Next up is Brian, followed by Penny.
Yeah, most of the comments have gone to very short period of time, the present, immediate impact, how you feel. I think test of time is important, and sustainability. And to me, interestingly, the ability to, 2 things.
Brian, you're very faint.
The ability to accommodate change over time. And to do that, one approach is very provisional, a provisional design.
Thank you. Next up is Mark.
I think Brian just beat me to what I was about to say, is to A, meet the requirements, and B, to have a cycle into continually meeting the requirements perpetually, or else it's going to be stale.
Thank you. Next up is going to be, let's see here, Aya, go ahead. Aya, you need to unmute.
Oh, yeah. So if you stress test it and it doesn't break, it's a good design.
Thank you. Thank you. Marco.
Something that doesn't tower over the rest of the designs in the vicinity.
Thank you. All right. Next question is going to be, what is the role of emotion in design? What is the role of emotion in design? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to answer. We'll start with Jing.
Yeah, emotion is very, very important part, at least half of the importance of the design. to fill the emotional needs.
Thank you. Next up is Evanique.
I think Abika spoke on it earlier when she said you can just breathe and feel at peace with it. So I think it's a huge thing because that's how you motivate people, and that's how you know that you've done a good job. There's something at peace within yourself.
Wonderful. Mark.
I think I'm going to take the contrasting viewpoint here and say you have to warn against too much emotion in design. You don't want to love your design too much, so much so that you stop looking at the other alternatives. A lot of times we make things and we think they're so perfect, but we're blinded by that emotion.
Wonderful point. Next up is Ambika, followed by Joe. Ambika.
So good design makes you feel wonder and stillness. And it's not about jumping up and down like when it's a TV show, but it's that beauty. And beauty is functional, completely functional, I feel. I just posted 2 pictures along in the chat if you have time.
Next up is going to be Joe.
It's a balance. It's a balance between right brain, left brain, kind of your creativity aspect and analytical. So I think it's definitely just it's that simple.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next question is going to be, how do you teach children so that they grow up with a design culture? How do you build an education system to promote or to transmit the design culture? Jeng.
I think we have to have the integrated way of teaching instead of separate out the subject, like project-based learning type. Actually, my son, he's a very good designer. He designs games, every different thing every single day. So I see that's a good sign.
Thank you. Next up is Ambika, Joe, Mark, and Laurie. Ambika.
When kids are very little, we just watch them play because they're real great designers. They're always finding things to play with. And the thing is to not stop them, but when there's a concern, guide them, and maybe this, but let them really have that power. Now, when you get to school and college, you really need to remind them and teach them that we are interconnected because they don't understand these principles, at least my experience showed me. And so that's what I was doing, and showing them ways to monetize their skills. That's something else I did, which was so much fun because they didn't know they had all these gifts. So,
thank you. Next up is Joe, Mark, and Laurie. Joe.
It's not a simple solution, but I think I would make it more experience-based, essentially make school more experience-based, and I would have a little bit less structure, like according where you should be at this point in your life. So everything that's like kind of where you relegate it to things like age and things along those lines. I would reimagine how it's actually structured and how kids engage with the actual topics themselves, and that's through experience.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mark, followed by Laurie. Mark.
4 words: Legos without specialized pieces.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. I want to speak for the Montessori system, which is the most amazing system that I've seen to encourage this, because it regards the child as an independent being, and the job of the teacher is to create the right environment for the child to grow and be watchful as a gardener and provide things as needed. Next up is Laurie, Brian and Penny, and Joe. Laurie.
Okay, so I think that there should be more hands-on stuff going on, especially when they get a little bit older, like wood shop and sewing, and so they can really get the skills, and so they can make something that they design and have the whole process.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Brian and Penny.
So I agree with what everyone said. The many
Can't
people,
hear them.
oh, I don't know what's going on. Can you hear me better?
Yeah, it is a little better. Go ahead. Just speak into the mic.
Yeah, I don't know. It's usually quite good. I agree with what many people have said, focusing on project. I would design projects that integrate traditional disciplines so that students learn the traditional disciplines and also learn the skills of integration.
Thank you. Joe.
Really quickly, reward the students for questions, not answers.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, folks, so we are running out of time. So what I want to do is I want to tell you about the next chapter. So we're going to be studying chapter 9. That is going to be composition, composing and connecting. That's what we're going to dive into. I have just read it before I posted the meetup. It is very accessible. So we're going to go for chapter 9 next. Now you're welcome to just read through up to chapter 9. I encourage you to read the whole book, which will actually give, doing this in different passes actually works very well. It integrates with one another very well. So we're going to be doing chapter 9 and look forward to seeing you. Unfortunately, I'm traveling this Thursday, so no meetup on Thursdays, this Thursday. And we will go back to the meetups on Thursdays. This is an exception. Thursday meetup will be an opportunity for you to talk about whatever it is that you're learning about the book. So you can bring up any chapter, anything that you want. You can talk about your own experience of learning. So that's the plan. All right. Does anybody have comment about, is anybody concerned about us jumping around the book? I know that books are thought of as sequential things, which they are not. Let me remind folks who have not read How to Read a Book. You need to read How to Read a Book in order to read a book. The idea is that there are 20 million books out there, and 1 million books are being published every year. You need a strategy of reading to keep up with that. And the same is true with a book. There is a book is a series of ideas, and the thing is that this particular book is designed for this, that you can go into a chapter and each of them is actually accessible if you're really interested in it. So don't be afraid to read out of order. I would recommend reading chapter 9 before the next meetup. Okay. But even if you don't read it, if you decide that, okay, I'm going to read it backwards, or you're going to read it forwards, or in any particular constellation, or depending on which strikes your fancy, what is it that you are connecting to what, you can choose whatever method. Okay. We are all going to take our own paths, and we are going to find a way of learning from each other as we crisscross on these paths. But the main path that I'm putting is a spiral path that goes to the book. It is trying to hit ideas from different parts, part 2, part 3, part 4, and part 5, one after another, so that we come at the topic of design from multiple angles. And I'm choosing what I think is the most fundamental way to start off. There is always within a part, but that's a matter of judgment. Okay, so that's what I'm doing, so that everybody who's, regardless of the approach that they are taking, they will find at least some things to work on instead of working for a length on something that doesn't speak to you. You'll keep coming back to things. On Thursdays, you're welcome to talk about in full stereo about what your approach is, and looking forward to learning from each other. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much. I will see you soon. Bye.